American Beauty was one of my favourite films. For a long time, it was my favourite, and I was looking forward to eventually making a video or two on it. But then this happened. Now, instead of the great joy the film once gave me, I just have a sinking feeling in my stomach when I think of it. It's still the same film, but I'm not sure I'll ever be able to quite look at it the same way again. At the end of the day, that sinking feeling and the shift in perspective that caused it is what this video is actually about. But first, I've got to take a look at American Beauty and Kevin Spacey before I can talk about that feeling. I've also got to put up a few disclaimers here. Firstly, this video will reference acts of sexual assault and misconduct that may be disturbing or upsetting for some viewers. I'm also going to show some clips from American Beauty that become rather unsettling in light of recent allegations. In using these clips, I will also have to spoil some aspects of the film. It's also important to note here that although I'm focusing this discussion on the alleged perpetrator in Spacey and a film he acted in, I don't mean to cast any doubt on the testimony of the victims of sexual assault that have recently come forward. I very much believe them. But for the purposes of being accurate, I will refer to these acts as alleged, except in the instances where it has been proven or admitted to, see Roman Polanski or Louis C.K. for examples. I in no way wish to paint Spacey in a positive or sympathetic light by describing him as the alleged perpetrator, but lacking legal certainty that he did the things he was accused of, I won't claim that he did in fact do them. With all that out of the way, I'll start by discussing the film itself. Taken for what it is, it's always been a somewhat divisive film. Some think it unbearably pretentious, others incredibly beautiful. Some consider it devastatingly sad, and I thought it was wonderfully uplifting. Even now, as uncomfortable as the movie is to watch in light of actions its lead actor may have made, I still really like it. But I have to pick and choose. I have to separate Lester Burnham from Kevin Spacey, lest my stomach start to sink again. There's still a lot to love. Darkly satirical, but occasionally touchingly earnest, at once funny and tragic, both brutal and sympathetic towards its characters, it's a film that perfectly captures the cracks in the cheery veneer of the American dream. Lester and Jane Burnham, Ricky Fitz and his father, they all remain some of my favourite characters ever put on screen, and everything from the screenplay to the music to the editing are still as fantastic as ever. And then there's the acting. Across the board it's pretty good, but especially so the performances behind the four characters I mentioned earlier. Thora Birch is utterly convincing as Jane, Wes Bentley is equally wonderful as Ricky Fitz, and Chris Cooper just exudes menace in a role far more complex than it initially appears as Frank Fitz. They are all brilliant, but I'm not sure it'd matter if the central character wasn't as well portrayed. And he is. Kevin Spacey's performance as Lester Burnham is incredible. And with that, we come to Kevin Spacey. Given American Beauty was one of my favourite films and Spacey's performance as Lester Burnham is incredible, it shouldn't surprise anyone that he was one of my favourite actors. His performances are of course unchanged by the allegations levelled at him, but it does make me feel extremely uncomfortable for having thought so highly of them, and more uncomfortable still to say as much again here. That said, I don't think I'll have any issues rewatching The Usual Suspects or, more recently, Baby Driver, because his role in both films lacks the disconcerting similarities that come awfully close to linking Spacey as actor to Burnham as character, even if those similarities weren't intentional. Spacey is alleged to have made moves to drunkenly seduce a 14-year-old. Burnham in the film seeks to seduce his daughter's teenage friend. Spacey has been accused of a lot of sexual misconduct since this first allegation, and with each new accusation, scenes like this feel closer and closer to the disturbing reality of who Spacey actually is.
What do you want?
Are you kidding? I want you. I wanted you since the first moment I saw you. You were the most beautiful thing I have ever seen.
In media and culture, a debate often pops up surrounding context. Is it okay to know that an actor is a bad person, but still enjoy the movies they play roles in? This is where that sinking feeling comes in. How can we separate the politics of a film from the politics of the filmmaker? Grappling with this question is what's leaving me feeling so uncomfortable. I've recently read an excellent blog post from Kathleen Stock that explores this question, along many others, in relation to her love for Woody Allen films. I'll link this blog post in the description. It's a great read. At the end of this post is a line that I wish to quote here, a line which I must admit I have slightly changed the context of by quoting it in the manner I do. So reading the whole post is again highly encouraged. She concludes her blog post by stating people shouldn't cast aside the works of individuals that are morally reprehensible, because people can be complex, have differing and even contrastive personality characteristics, and that even people with very bad characteristics can sometimes make and produce enjoyable, pleasant, good, true, or otherwise life-enhancing things. All that is to say audiences are equipped with the ability to separate a filmmaker from their film. Arguably, in maintaining a love for Woody Allen's films, Stock has to far more actively make these distinctions between filmmaker and film than I do in this instance. Perhaps it's silly to compare the discomfort in seeing similarities between an abusive actor and their character to the discomfort in appreciating the films of a probable pedophile in Woody Allen, but that still doesn't make me feel much better about the whole thing. Just as I can't totally separate Louis C.K. from Louis, the show, I also have trouble separating Kevin Spacey from his performance as Lester Burnham. Perhaps the answer I might seek, then, lies in Stuart Hall's notions of encoding and decoding. This discussion comes from the academic discourse I've had the privilege of studying at uni, but should be fairly easy to understand. At its core, it discusses 3 different stages that almost any media will go through. Actually, it describes 4, but for my discussion here, I want to focus on the production, circulation, and use of media, as Hall understands it. Production is the stage in which meaning is first encoded into a text. The meaning inscribed in the text will be communicated in forms that are informed by the producer's frameworks of knowledge. That is to say, the way a filmmaker might make a film in order to convey particular ideas will be affected by the cultural, societal, and personal environments that surrounded said filmmaker. In the second stage, we have circulation. Here, Hall was referring to traditional broadcast media, but I like to translate the idea into medium rather than circulation. Conveying an idea visually in a film must, by virtue of its form, be a different process than conveying it through words, and this also informs the way a producer will encode meaning into their work. Finally, there is the use, the stage in which a member of the audience will decode meaning from a text based on their own frameworks of knowledge. It's important to note here that each of these 3 stages have a relationship with each other. The medium will affect what messages are encoded and what messages are decoded. But what's most important to note is that the message that is encoded and the message that is decoded can never be exactly the same. So, how does this relate to American Beauty then? Well, the frameworks of knowledge that inform the film have stayed the same, and the medium is of course unchanged, but my own frameworks of knowledge have shifted, and as such I decode a different message to that which I initially did. It's also worth noting that in this specific instance, that this act of encoding and decoding may appear in different forms throughout the process of making the film. So Alan Ball's script may have attempted to communicate something subtly or dramatically different to the end result as directed by Sam Mendes. Mendes too might have directed Spacey with a different intention to that which drove Spacey's performance. All that is to say that there is never any one true meaning in a film, or indeed any other text, because ultimately we can only understand what we decode, and not what was originally encoded.
The ad said this pool was lagoon-like. There's nothing lagoon-like about it.
Except for maybe the bugs.
There aren't even any plants out here.
What do you call this? Is this not a plant? If you have a problem with the plants, I can always call my landscape architect. Solved.
I mean, I think lagoon, I think waterfall, I think tropical. This is a cement hole.
In a sense, I could dismiss my moral misgivings surrounding American Beauty with this in mind. With a shift in my frameworks of knowledge, I'm decoding a message I didn't previously, and one that almost certainly wasn't what was initially encoded. In my prior viewings of American Beauty, I didn't read the relationship between Lester Burnham and Angela Hayes as being the focus of the film. It was a feature, albeit the most morally problematic one, of Burnham's desire to reclaim his youth, the something he speaks of as lost at the beginning of the film. So, assuming that initial interpretation was closer to the original intentions of the creators, I should be able to accept the film for what it is, and accept that, although the film hasn't changed, what I take from it has. I say I should be because it still makes me uncomfortable to watch scenes like this one, even with all this in mind. I don't necessarily find answers in this framework, but it does help me to explain how I can both enjoy American Beauty and find it unpleasant to watch. In a way, it's my own reaction that becomes so uncomfortable, but it's also more than that. I'm upset at having lost my favourite interpretation of the film, even if I can still enjoy it to some lesser extent. I'm upset that instead of discussing the deliberately odd editing that denotes a fantasy sequence, or the wonderful film that was made through an optimistic edit of a very pessimistic script, I'm left talking about Spacey's disgusting actions, or disgusting alleged actions, and how they change my perspective of what was once my favourite film. In the coming months, I expect many more will face these sorts of questions, with more and more actors, directors, and celebrities being revealed to have abused their positions of power and doing some disgusting things. The people whose lives have been in some way touched by the works of these individuals will have to face some uncomfortable questions. I don't have the answers, and I'm inclined to think very few people do. But I'd be really curious to know how you interact with the media you consume, both before and after something like this is revealed. I think this sort of discussion is both really interesting and important, but none can be more important than the stories of the victims of sexual assault and misconduct that have recently come forward. Even though it's hard to hear about so many horrible actions, hopefully Hollywood will be a slightly better place for those stories having been told. Sorry if this video was a bit of a downer, but if you've made it this far, thanks for hearing me out. I look forward to seeing your perspectives in the comments below. Cheers, have a good one.